Okay, so today we are practicing with arrays. So as an exercise, what I'm going to do is create a class that contains a list of fractions. So I've created the initial skeleton of the class where I have an instance variable, make it private, which has an array of fractions. So it has a fraction, put the square brackets behind it to make sure that it becomes an array, and I'm just calling it fractions. I'm having here a constructor, and I'm asked to create some fractions, and I'm going to prompt the user for those fractions here, and I'm going to implement a count, which counts the number of fractions that are in this current sequence that are equal to the fraction that is provided as an argument. And I'm also creating a method that will multiply all the fractions in the list together and returns the result. Alright, so I've created the main. The main is taking the number of fractions to create as a command line argument. So the first argument that is provided from the list of arguments. Then I am going to create the sequence and ask to create that number. I'm going to ask the number of fractions for the number of fractions that are equal to 1/2, and then I'm going to ask it to multiply all and print those results. So let's start with putting something here so that we can actually compile this. So I'm going to return, let's say here, a 0, and let's here return a null, which will give me a null pointer exception. I'll just see that later. So let's start by prompting the user for the fractions. So I've created the keyboards. The one thing that I now have to do is I actually have to create an instance of the array of fractions, and I can do this now because I know how many fractions I want to create, namely number of fractions. So the instance variable fractions, I want this to be a new array of fractions, and the size of this array should be number of fractions. Now that I've done that, I want to populate this array, and I want to put in there the right amount of fractions. So because I need to do this some fixed number of times provided by the number of fractions, this is a for loop for me. So for index, I'm going to create index into this newly created list, starting at 0. And I'm going to go until I have all the fractions that I need. Length, number of fractions, and increment by 1 at each iteration. So what I need to do is prompt the user for the numerator and the denominator. So system.out.print, enter numerator for fraction, and let's make this index +1. Because I'm starting counting at 0, but for people it's better to start counting at 1. Plus, and an appropriate prompt. And now I am going to get the enumerator, int numerator is equal to the scanner, the keyboard scanner, dot next int. Now prompt for the denominator. Fraction. Alright, so I'm prompting for that. I'm missing a parentheses. I messed this up. There. So int denominator, and grab the integer that the user entered. And now I just want to print a blank line so that there is a delimiter between the fractions that I prompt for. So I'm just going to print a line. And now I can create the fraction that I want to put inside of the array. So fraction, let's call it f, is a new fraction. And I want to create it with the numerator that was entered and the denominator. And then I want to set fractions at the index that I'm currently working at equal to f. Okay. So here I've done this in 2 lines. I can do this in 1 line as well, which is what you'll see much more commonly. I can just say fraction at index is equal to this new fraction directly. Okay. And it's added straight into the array by placing it at the specified index. Alright, so this here gives me my constructor, which is creating the sequence. So let's compile and run this. So I need to compile everything. Capital F here, and the other error is the same one, fractions, and here as well. Alright, let's run this. And notice that if I don't enter that command line argument, I'm going to get an array index out of bounds exception at the line that is trying to grab the command line argument. So when I actually run this, I have to specify how many fractions I want to create, and let's actually just create 2 of them for now so that I'm only prompted twice. So I'm saying create 2 fractions. So let's make the first one be a half, so the numerator is 1, denominator is 2, and let's say the next one is 6 out of 7. And now I'm getting a null pointer exception in this line of code here, because I'm trying to convert it to a toString. So let's actually implement this one first. So if I want to multiply all of them together, I basically have to go through the entire array and do multiply, 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 multiply. But I have to start somewhere. I have to start with a fraction to start multiplying with. So what I really want to do is let's create a variable that has the multiplication of all. So let's call this fraction mult all, and I'll initialize it to null. Now I can't do null dot multiply. I can't multiply it with anything, but I want in there the result of multiplying some fractions. So really what I want to do is I want to go through this entire array as before. Fractions dot length. So I want to go through the entire array and increment the index by 1 each time, and I want to multiply really these things together. So I could say mult all is equal to mult all, so I take this current fraction and multiply it, which is an actual method in the fraction class, with the one at the current index. And then just return mult all. This gives me a little bit of a problem because mult all is starting out as null, and this here I'm then asking to multiply it with it. So there's a couple things that I can do to solve this. I could of course just create 1, because I could create the fraction 1 over n and then just multiply and it cancels out. But what if I don't have any fractions in there? So what I'd really like to do is grab the first one, just initialize it to the first one, which is at 0, and then just start my index at 1. Almost good. The only problem is, what if I don't have any fractions in there whatsoever? What if the list is completely empty? So I don't have any fractions in there. Maybe not as likely to happen, but it could still happen. So what I really want to do is I want to make sure that any fractions exist at all. If there is no fractions, there's nothing to multiply. So if fractions dot length is greater than or equal to 1, then I'm going to say mult all is equal to that first fraction, and do my multiplication, and then I return the results. I still have the problem that if I have an empty list here, so I'm going to remove this toString and print like this. So again, I'll just enter two of them. So let's enter 1/2. And let's say 5 out of 7. And I have 0 fractions because I haven't implemented that, but the sequence multiplies returns 5 out of 14, which is indeed correct. So it multiplied the whole sequence there. So the one thing that I still have to implement is the counts, and I want to count how many are equal to the fraction that is as input. So again, I have to cycle through the whole list, and I need a counter. So I'm going to first say 0, because I haven't found any yet that are equal to that fraction that is given to me as an input. So again, for int index is equal to 0, index is less than fractions dot length, and index and increment by 1 at each iteration. And each one I want to just check to see if it is equal to fraction to count. Is it equal to the current fraction? So equals fractions at the current index. And if it is, then I need to increment my counter by 1. And I'm missing a parenthesis. And instead of returning 0, let's return the counter that I have initialized there. Compile. Let's say that the first one I'm going to make it 2 out of 4, and the next one 3 out of 6. So I actually have 2 fractions that are a half, and it's correctly reported, and the result would be a quarter, because a half times a half is a quarter. Let's run it this time with asking for 4 fractions, and the first one I'm going to make 1/2. The second one, let's say 3/4. The third one, let's make it 6 out of 12, which is also a half. And then the last one, say 8 out of 7. So I got indeed 2 fractions, and you can double check that the resulting multiplication is indeed 3 out of 14. So just an example on how to work with arrays in Java.